Hey guys, it's Avalon, and today I am back with a new series which is going to be the Plant Care 101, so Plant Care Basics. And I've been meaning to do this series for a while just because I think there's so much information out there about plant care, but ultimately it just comes down to understanding the basics of water, light, temperature, etc. But I think it can be quite overwhelming when you're getting into the plant world. I know for me, I had a whole bunch of plants and then you set them up really nicely in your house and then suddenly you realize they have so many different care requirements and you're not prepared for that. That was me. I had a whole bunch and I didn't really know what I was doing. And now working in the plant world, I suppose, in the plant business world, it's really interesting seeing what pieces of information people need and people don't need. So today's going to be episode 1 and it's going to be all about water. So I have my little book right here and I'm going to be talking about water for today. So firstly, just generally about water. Water is essential for plants, whether it's an epiphyte, so it grows on another tree, or whether it's a plant that grows in the ground, in the soil. No matter where the plant is, it needs some amount of water. And this can vary very greatly to obviously aquatic plants, to plants that need a little bit of water here and then, to plants that need very little, like plants that live in deserts. And it's all based on what the plant requires, how the plant grows. And I'm sure if you did like any form of schooling, you would have learned 2 things. Number 1, that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. I'm sure we all know that one. But number 2, most of you would have done photosynthesis. So a huge part of photosynthesis, which is how the plant converts light into chemical energy, into glucose, for the plant to continue growing. One of the biggest things is that the plant needs H2O, so water. So clearly it's a very essential part of the plant, and the biggest death of plants I've seen personally is either underwater or overwatering. So the first thing is which water to use. And there's, I think, a lot of debate about whether to use rainwater or tap water. I personally usually use tap water, straight out of the tap, keeping in mind I am in Australia, so our water is safe to drink from in most parts. I'm from Sydney, so in a city, so I can drink water straight out of the tap and I give my plants the same water. I haven't seen a huge difference between using water out of a tap or filtered water. It is up to you, but generally if you're in a place where the water is safe to drink out of the tap, then I'm sure it's fine for your plants. On the other hand, if you are in a place where you get lots of rain, and anytime it rains here anyway, I always put out lots of buckets for rainwater, because rainwater contains all the nutrients that your plant would naturally be getting if it was growing in its natural environment. So in the rainforest or in a foresty area. So I try and use rainwater as much as I can as well, keeping in mind also that some plants, like your carnivorous plants, so Venus flytrap sundews, will actually die with tap water, so they need a constant source of rainwater. Most plants aren't like this and will thrive with either, but if you can get your hands on rainwater, if you have one of those big oil drums out the back that collects rainwater, this is perfect for your plants as well, and you can use this on all your types of plants, simply because it contains the nutrients that plants often need. That's kind of rainwater versus tap water. The second thing is how to water. There are lots of different ways that people like to water their plants. I do the most basic, which is literally just a jug full of water, pour it on top, wait for it to drain away, and then put my plant back where it came from. That's the most basic, simple way to water your plants. Most plants are totally fine with this form of watering. The main one that isn't is begonias, especially your begonia rexes. So they're the ones with a lot of bright patterns that you often see for sale. These plants hate getting their leaves wet. If their leaves get wet, then they usually will brown and die. And the same for plants, even like pothos, of devil's ivy, etc. These plants, if they get lots of water consistently on some of their leaves, the leaves start to rot. So just be aware of that, especially plants with white coloring on their leaves. But in general, just pouring the water into the soil at the top, near where the base of the plant is, does the trick. For other plants that are a bit more temperamental, and for example, string of pearls, shout out to anyone who's got one of those alive, you're amazing. Chain of hearts, or even some of my kind of more special African violets actually is another one that likes bottom watering. So that's the opposite of top watering. So what you can do is you get a dish, fill it with water, and then you just place the plant on top, assuming that you've got a pot that has a hole in the bottom so that the roots can suck out the water. This is a really good way to do it in the sense that it means that the plant will only take as much as it needs. You can see this with self-watering pots as well. I've got a few of those. And the plant will only take what it needs, and then either the base, the bottom bit which contains the water, will evaporate out, or it'll just keep it there until it needs it the next time. So either of those method works. It really just depends on what plant you have and what's easier for you. I will put them all in the sink together and then just do a big water, let them drain out, let them dry a little bit, and then bring them back. So the next thing to talk about is when to water and how do you tell if a plant needs watering. So as I said before, the most important thing is knowing what type of plant you have and its general water requirements. The easiest way to do this is to just learn, seriously, very easily, Google your plant, Google its water requirements, but also look at where it lives, because where it lives will indicate how much water it needs or not. So for example, I've got some plants that are native to places like Brazil, Borneo, Colombia, so places that have quite dense tropical rainforests with high biodiversity. And these places, if you look at the science of it, it's quite fascinating about where all their biomass goes. But for tropical rainforests, the largest amount of biomass comes from their plants and their animals, just because these places are very wet and they are able to host a large amount of species. So for plants like that, I know that they need to be humid and they like a constant drink of water. Whereas I have some other plants that some of them go dormant in winter. So for example, alocasias and colocasias, they often go dormant, which means I know that I need to hold off watering a little bit more. My tassel fern really loves a drink every now and then, but also likes to go dry between waterings. But generally, the way that I know if my plant needs watering is I don't follow a schedule, because every plant's different and they're living and they need different requirements. I just take my finger, I stick it in the soil. It's like if you were doing it with a cake and a knife, and I pull my finger out, and if there is soil on my finger, then I leave it for a few more days. If I put my finger in, pull it back out, and there is nothing on said finger, I know that it needs a drink. So essentially it's how wet the soil is. And this can be harder in winter when you don't know if the soil is cold or if it's wet or not, but generally that's how I work it out. Also get used to picking up your plants as well. If the pot's heavy, it probably means the water hasn't dried out yet. Or if it's really light, then it probably needs a drink. And when I give my plants a drink, I'm not stingy on the water. I really chuck that whole liter of water. I let the water drain through. And it means that all the roots get a really good soak, get a really good drink, and then I don't have to be as careful with my watering routine. I can let it go for longer. So generally that's how I water my plants. I just use the soil and the finger method. It's always worked. And it's a super easy way to do it as well. But also keep in mind that the type of soil you use, the temperature and the pot type will also affect how much water you give your plants. And it sounds overwhelming, but it's not too bad, I promise. With soil, if it's a coarser soil, so it's got more bark in it, or it's not just premium soil, it will usually dry out quicker just because there's more air inside the potting mix. If it's just a basic premium soil, it'll probably take longer for the soil to dry. If you're in a hot place, so I'm in Australia, which means during the summer I have to water my plants quite seriously once or twice a day, because when it gets to over 40 degrees Celsius, it means that water is constantly evaporating. I will spray the plant and the water will have evaporated before it reaches the leaf. That's how hot we're talking. Whereas in winter, you can let your plants go for much longer without a drink simply because it's cooler, and it means that the soil won't dry out as quick. And finally, let's make it finally. When you're talking about pots, if it's in a terracotta pot, the water is going to be absorbed by the terracotta. Terracotta is a very porous mix, so it means that there's a lot of air holes within the pot itself, which means that when you water it, you'll often find that the pot itself feels very damp. And this can often mean that the roots themselves aren't getting enough water because it's instantly drawn out by the terracotta pot. So keep an eye on that. Whereas with a plastic pot, water's not really going anywhere except out the holes. So it'll often take a longer time between drinks. But that's generally Water 101. Always remember that your plant, as I said before, is a living being. It's something that responds to its environment. And often plants will tell you when they need a water, whether it's with a peace lily that droops its leaves, whether it's with some of my plants will slow down with their growth. If they need more water, they'll droop, their leaves will change shape, etc. So really just pay attention to the way that your plant is growing. But most importantly, try things out. So especially with those hardier plants that people have, so my peace lily, for example, we are on the same wavelength. We are together. As the French would say, on est sur la même longueur d'onde, which is like, we're on the same wave. In that I know when it needs a drink because I've been watching it for years. I know that it'll droop, it'll need some water. I know that if its soil's dry, it needs some water. So just basic attention is really important when you're looking after your plants and watering them. If you're struggling with understanding how much moisture is in your plant, I recommend getting a moisture meter. I think you can get those at Bunnings, most hardware stores and garden stores, and you just put that in the water and in the soil, and it'll tell you how much moisture is in the soil. And that kind of gives you a good indication of whether your plant needs a drink or not. I trust by my soil and finger method, but if you don't trust yourself with doing that, and especially at the start, I really had no idea what I was doing, something like a moisture meter may be really helpful in helping you understand how much water your plant needs. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed episode 1 of Plant Care 101. If you have any watering questions, leave them below and get excited for number 2, which I'm hoping will be on light and how light works, windows, etc., all that jazz. Anyway, have a good week and I'll see you next time.